The Russia-Ukraine war continues with victories and defeats in the shadow of explosions and clashes. Many developments in the air, on land, and at sea affect the course of the war. But what about the developments outside the war zones? Can the statements made by unarmed and uncamouflaged people far away from explosions and clashes affect the course of the war? Yes, some statements are as effective as missiles blowing up the most important headquarters. In particular, the statements and confessions of those who have witnessed the events on the battlefield can have the power of discrediting countries and armies. A statement made the other day destroyed the diminishing reputation of the Russian army. Andrei Medvedev, who served as a commander with the Wagner Group, a private military company but resigned from his post due to lawlessness and corruption, made a striking statement the other day. Medvedev left the Wagner Group in late July 2022 and defected from Russia in January 2023, seeking asylum in Norway. Medvedev's statements dropped like a bomb on Russia's agenda. Former Wagner Group official Andrei Medvedev made statements to an American media organization. Medvedev announced that Russian soldiers who refused to serve in the occupied territories were killed. Medvedev said that soldiers who did not want to fight against Ukraine were shot and thrown into graves in front of the eyes of the soldiers who had just joined the front. The Russian military may be ruthlessly trying to solve its problems, such as the lack of military personnel to serve in the occupied territories. The many soldiers leaving the front are surrendering to Ukrainian troops and the increasing casualties, as Medvedev says. Because before this statement of Medvedev, the statements of Russian soldiers who were captured by Ukraine or surrendered to the Ukrainian troops and left the front describing the atrocities in the Russian army came to the fore. The phone calls of Russian soldiers serving in Ukraine were leaked recently. The most striking of these conversations was what a Russian soldier named Sergei said while talking to his girlfriend. Sergei said that Russian army ordered the soldiers to kill hundreds of civilians in the city of Bucha. Sergei told his girlfriend, "They told us that there were a lot of civilians walking around where we were going, and they ordered us to kill everyone we saw." In total, Ukrainian intelligence intercepted 22 phone calls revealing that the inhuman orders and practices of the Russian army were criticized by soldiers within the army. The handful of Russian soldiers held by the Russian army are kept in the army with threats. One thing is constantly on their minds: to leave the front line or surrender to Ukrainian troops. Russian soldiers are waiting for the right moment to make this happen. In recent months, a media outlet reported that Russian soldiers had injured themselves in order to escape the war. The soldiers' statements confirm this claim. In one of the leaked phone calls, a Russian air assault soldier says to his girlfriend, "I had a commander who shot himself in the leg just to get out of here." Soldiers who were able to escape from the Russian army continue to report the inhuman practices of the army in their statements. One of them is Nikita Chibrin, who escaped from the Russian occupiers and fled to Europe via Belarus and Kazakhstan. Describing the brutality within the Russian army, Shurban says that in the 64th Separate Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade where he served, there were maniacs who enjoyed killing people and rapes. Chibrin also said that Russian invaders broke into homes of Ukrainian civilians and looted items such as jewelry, computers, and phones. He said the occupiers sold the stolen items in Belarus. Many soldiers serving in the Russian army say it is not right to fight Ukraine. They say that Russian soldiers are unaware of the operations they are carrying out, and the reason they are in Russian paratrooper and Pavel Filatayev, who questioned all these and published his thoughts in a 141-page book, reveals almost all the crimes of the Russian army in his writings. Filatayev explained that the reason for writing these confessions as follows: "I am not afraid to fight in war, but I need to feel justice to realize that what I did was right. And I believe that all this is failing not only because the government is stealing everything, but because the Russians don't feel that what we are doing is right. Why do we need this war?" And I really thought, God, if I survive, I will do everything in my power to stop this. Pavel Felicia was wounded in the eye by a shell explosion and left the army saying that he could not fight like that. Filatyov, who left Russia immediately after leaving the Russian army, began to describe all the barbarities he witnessed during the war. Filatyov also described the difficult conditions Russian soldiers were living in. He said that the authorities in the army did not care about the hardships of Russian soldiers. Filatyov said that he could bathe only once for 2 months and did not eat bread for a month and a half. Filatyov also made striking statements about the equipment in the Russian army. It has long been stated that the equipment destroyed in the war cells was left over from the Soviet-Russian era and was insufficient against the Ukrainian army. Filatyov talked about a development he experienced on this issue. He said that when Russia launched its invasion attempt in Ukraine, weapons were distributed to the soldiers in the army. However, he stated that these weapons were rusted and a strap was broken. Filatyov's writings revealed many facts that the Russian army is trying to conceal and the inhumanity of its actions in the war zones. In a report containing the statements of soldiers who surrendered to Ukrainian troops or escaped from the front, a Russian soldier openly expressed all the inhuman acts he committed in the war. Here are the confessions of the Russian occupier. I, Daniel Andreevich Fakin of the Guard Corps, a soldier of Military Unit 5460, confess to all the crimes are committed in Andreevka, shooting civilians, stealing from civilians and taking their phones. Then our fighters, all the infantry fighting on the front line, while the Russian army is suffering a setback on the front line with the losses it suffered against Ukraine. It is also losing credibility with the confessions of Russian soldiers who surrendered after these confessions. Russian leader Vladimir Putin is seen as a ruthless person by the whole world. Putin is aware of all the developments confessed by the surrendered soldiers, but he ignores them because Putin cannot even find soldiers to fight. Almost all the soldiers in the Russian army do not want to take part in the invasion of Ukraine. Therefore, Putin, who cannot find soldiers, mostly deploys mercenaries belonging to the Wagner Group and Chechens loyal to Kadyrov in the occupation zones. This means that untrained and ruthless people are being deployed on the front lines. The atrocities committed by the Wagner Group during the occupation are known to the whole world. Last week, the United States declared the Wagner Group an international criminal organization. This company is headed by Yevgeny Prigozhin, one of the closest friends of Russian leader Putin. The whole world sees Putin and his friend as wrong. It is predicted that Russia will have big problems even if the war ends with dwindling ammunition, surrendered soldiers, and declining reputation. The war between Ukraine and Russia radically changed the tactics of modern warfare. The Ukrainian military has made small war equipment a game changer. Ukraine's innovative war practices stunned the Russian army and fascinated the armies of the world from the beginning of the war. There have been game changers that have made their mark on certain stages, such as the Javelin, Bayraktar, TB2, Star Streak, M777 howitzer. But if you were asked to explain the Ukrainian war with a weapon, it would definitely be HIMARS. The effectiveness of HIMARS has been proven throughout the war and compared to some weapons in Russia's possession. HIMARS has become a nightmare for the Russian army. At this point, the Ukrainian army has more than 30 HIMARS batteries, and thanks to the successful shots from these batteries, the course of the Ukrainian war has turned in favor of Ukraine. The Ukrainian military uses HIMARS not only for defensive purposes, but also in the vast majority of offensive operations. Since HIMARS is a mobile system, it has become an indispensable weapon for remote attack operations. This is one of the most important reasons for the successful conclusion of every offensive operation of the Ukrainian army. A new one has been added to this nightmare. Recently, it destroyed the most important part of Russia's most advanced anti-aircraft missile system with HIMARS operated by Ukrainian artillery units. Ukrainian artillery units hit the 55K6 mobile command post, a crucial part of Russia's S-400 long-range surface-to-air missile system. US officials have clarified that the destroyed command post is exactly the type of equipment HIMARS would use to target, although it is difficult to confirm the attack at this stage. The mobile command post, which was reported to have been destroyed in the southern Kherson region of Ukraine, is defined as the brain of the S-400 system. Taking this single vehicle out of combat is the only way to disable the S-400 batteries without destroying them. The S-400 system is of very high value, often well behind the front lines, out of reach of artillery and mechanized brigades. Disabling the S-400 batteries would allow Ukrainian drones and aircraft to fly more freely, improving the tactical position in favor of Ukraine. It has been reported many times that the S-400 was used by Russian forces to intercept rockets fired from HIMARS. Given this information, it can be said that this attack is a duel between two systems. During the attack, S-400 systems may have shot down several incoming HIMARS rockets, but when they kidnapped one, it was enough to decide the fate of the systems. So how reliable is the effectiveness of the S-400s? Russia has developed the S-400 system to replace the obsolete S-300, although both are still in use. The S-400 Triumph, also known by its NATO reporting name SA-21 Growler, is a mobile platform that a U.S. defense officials describe as roughly comparable to the U.S. Patriot missile system. The characterization of this attack as a duel is directly comparable to its duel with Russian Kinzhal missiles launched against Patriot batteries supplied by the United States to Ukraine. In this context, it can be said that the S-400 batteries are not as successful as the Patriots. Western analysts noted that since the beginning of the Ukraine war, only 2 S-400 mobile surface-to-air missile systems have been destroyed. However, this number only includes visually confirmed losses, so the number could be higher. Looking at the current casualty list of the Ukrainian General Staff, the Ukrainian army has destroyed close to 350 Russian air defense systems since the beginning of the war. However, even if it is not disclosed how many of them are S-400 systems, it can be understood what kind of systems were destroyed from the regions where the Russian air defense systems were destroyed. This brings us to the attacks on Russian elements in Crimea. The Ukrainian army destroyed at least 150 of the 350 air defense systems it destroyed over the Crimea. Considering that Russia keeps Crimea security at a high level and S-400 systems are mostly deployed in Crimea, Ukraine may have destroyed at least 50 Siemens 400 batteries during the war. With the withdrawal of the Russian army from Kherson, the deployment of HIMARS to Kherson greatly strengthened Ukraine's southern defenses. The United States closely monitors the HIMARS capabilities of the Ukrainian artillery and continues to make moves towards it in new military aid packages. The United States supplied Ukraine with ammunition for artillery systems, as well as 38 HIMARS batteries. Washington also sent another Patriot air defense battery to the Ukrainian armed forces. This move by the U.S. is a huge step forward in supporting the Ukraine counter-offensive which is about to begin, since the Ukrainian army will be busy with defense while attacking. This will increase the need for modern defense weapons, and this assistance of the USA has been described as a move that supports the Ukrainian counterattack on a large scale. The Russian army lacked modern weapons throughout the war. Although Russia has modern main battle tanks such as the 90, it used only a small amount during the Ukraine war due to the small amounts of these tanks. This situation put the Russian army in a very weak position against the Ukrainian army equipped with modern weapons. Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke about what many believe was the beginning of Ukraine's much-anticipated counter-offensive and admitted that his forces currently do not have enough modern weapons. Kremlin officials reported that Ukraine launched an offensive against Russia, but Ukrainian officials stated that offensive operations against the Russian army did not signal the start of the expected counterattack. Officials reported that Putin acknowledged that Moscow troops were facing a shortage of modern weapons and hoped that the country's military industry could soon be able to meet the growing demand. While world leaders have been warning for months that President Putin's modern missiles may soon run out, Reports from the Russian military have suggested that Russian troops resorted to pulling old tanks from storage due to heavy losses in armored vehicles in Ukraine. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces said it was against Putin's character to accept this after Russia said it believed certain types of weapons were declining. The Russian army is particularly deficient in main battle tanks and ballistic missiles. This is evidenced by the fact that they use a lot of glider bombs today. The Russian army still has cruise missiles, but of course, they are very expensive and Russia does not have the power to replace them. That's why Russia uses cruise missiles very little in the Ukraine war. Despite President Putin's wishes, weapons production facilities came to a standstill due to the economic crisis due to global economic sanctions. This is also due to the fact that the parts used in the manufacture of weapons are imported from abroad. Although Russian President Vladimir Putin does not accept it, his army is being defeated in Ukraine. The post-Soviet image of a strong Russia was crushed many times during the Ukraine war. As President Putin admits, it is delusional to put his army into battle without modern weapons and expect success from it. The most intense clashes took place in the Zaporizhia region. The first attack was directed towards Lobkov. Ukrainians reportedly used at least 2 squads consisting of 4 armored fighting vehicles and 2 Humvees, which means that it was a light reconnaissance in first operation. After a short engagement, Ukrainians understood the most current Russian positions and the number of troops defending them and withdrew with minor losses. Immediately after the attack, Ukrainian artillery shelled the region intensely in cooperation with drone operators who corrected the fire to maximize the damage. After a quick regrouping, Ukrainians assaulted Russians in Lobkov again. One assault unit advanced from Stepov and attacked Russians from the hills. If you look at the topographic map, we can see that Lobkov is located in the lowlands, which means that Ukrainians had a tactical advantage. However, Russians in Jarabinsky are also at elevated positions and could with ease fire at Ukrainians. That is why the second Ukrainian group advanced along the gully and assaulted Jarabinsky, drawing their attention away from the main target. Russian sources reported that they stopped the Ukrainians 1 kilometer away from Jarabinsky, which means that the Ukrainians never left the gully and confirms that they were just distracting the enemy. Russian sources reported that Ukrainians also used 2 tanks to provide fire support from a distance and help to take cover as fast as possible. As a result, Ukrainians destroyed Russians in Lobkov and penetrated Russian positions by 2 kilometers. Some Russian sources reported that Ukrainians immediately abandoned Lobkov and the village became a gray zone. But just like the last time, these reports were based on the fact that Ukrainians withdrew heavy equipment away from the contact line after a successful assault. Despite tactical successes, judging by the small number of forces involved, this was still a reconnaissance in force operation. The goal of this attack was to check Russian defenses. The speed of reaction and cooperation forced Russians to reveal their artillery positions and map the minefields. In the long run, a successful development of attacks here will secure the flanks and allow to consider deep penetration in the main direction, which is south of Orikhiv. And when it comes to the main direction, Ukrainians conducted a mass reconnaissance in first operation here as well. Many sources reported that at around 2 p.m., Ukrainians opened 4 lines of attack toward Nestorenko, Kopelny, Robotnik, and Novopokrovka. It was reported that Ukrainians used approximately the same size of assault units, namely around 4 armored fighting vehicles, 4 Humvees, and sometimes 2 or 3 tanks. When it comes to the Velika-Novosilka direction, Russian sources reported that Ukrainians attacked Lavagna from Olevsk, Novogorgievka and Riven from Liverpool, and the hills west of Storazev. If you look at the topographic map, we can see that Ukrainians are not necessarily aiming to secure settlements, but rather tactical heights. Ukrainians already control the highest position in the region, which is Neuville. So by gradually increasing the area of control in the tree lines around Novogorgievka and Rivnopil, Ukrainians gradually undermine Russian defense. This is extremely visible south of Novosilka. By controlling the hills west of the river, Ukrainians will be able to force Russians out of the settlements in the lowlands without a fight. And it seems like this is already happening. Even the Russian sources claim that they did not lose Neskikny and Storozovoy. They confirmed that Ukrainians successfully established control over the hills around the settlements, which put Russians in a very difficult position. Lastly, when it comes to the previous successful Ukrainian attack on Donetsk, the area of Ukrainian control has shrunk due to the Russian counterattacks. Nonetheless, Russian sources confirm here as well that Ukrainians retained a foothold south of the river, which is located on the tactical heights west of the settlement. We can observe that the head of the Wagner forces, Prigozhin, was likely right when he criticized the obsession of the Russian high command with settlements. He said that regular Russian forces often prioritize holding or capturing settlements over tactical positions around the settlements, which basically means choosing the path of the most resistance. Prigozhin said that this produces good-looking reports instead of good situations on the ground. Prigozhin also ridiculed the most recent Russian situational report where Defense Minister Shoigu reported that they destroyed 8 Leopards during the fights around Novodonetsk. Russian Ministry of Defense decided to back up its claims and solidify its reputation and posted combat footage of how its assault helicopter Kar-52 destroyed 4 Leopards just 3 kilometers north of Novodonetsk. Unfortunately for the Russian Ministry of Defense, people quickly identified from the silhouette that all the targets were combined harvesters. Fortunately, there are no casualties as the farmers were not working at the time. Today, real combat footage was finally released, and it confirms that Ukrainians mostly used T-64-10. Things so far: the strategic reserves, namely the 9th and 10th Corps the Ukrainians created specifically to participate in the main phase of the counter-offensive, remain untouched, and low-power tanks have not been used as well. Just like during the previous counter-offensive operations, Ukrainians are increasing the intensity of attacks along the whole front line slowly and only when they reach the main line of fortification and can no longer advance by conducting small attacks. Ukrainians will pick the weakest spot and finally use their allow pause to deliver the main blow.